If most of your retirement savings is sitting in a traditional 401k, then there's a moment coming when part of your income stops being optional. And the larger that balance is, then the more noticeable that shift becomes. If 80% of a $1.5 million portfolio is pre-tax, that's $1.2 million that will eventually be taxed as income. Now, not all at once and not dramatically, but on a schedule that becomes less flexible over time. And once you stop working, the structure of that income starts to matter more than the size of your balance. Now, this isn't about panic, it's about control. Because once income becomes partially automatic, your ability then to shape it narrows. Now, this applies to people who did everything right. You saved consistently, you deferred taxes, you took the employer match, you built a meaningful portfolio, you did everything good. But now you're within 5 years of retirement. And maybe you've accumulated $900,000, maybe $1.8 million, maybe more. You're at the point now where you're not worried about running out of money, but you're wondering how to structure it correctly. And that's the shift. Because once most of your wealth sits in one tax bucket, retirement becomes less about growth and more about distribution control. And most people don't even realize that shift is happening. When you're working, your income is largely fixed, but when you retire, something changes, right? Your earned income disappears. And so let's say you decide to retire in your early 60s. And especially if you decide to delay taking your Social Security, then you may find yourself in a relatively low tax environment. And this period of time is a great period of time as far as your flexibility and planning out your future from a tax standpoint, because you can now decide how much income to create. You can decide which accounts to draw from and whether to shift assets between different tax buckets and also how much of a bracket to intentionally fill. You're in control. You're designing your tax path. But the thing that happens is that once Social Security begins, and really especially once RMDs, or required minimum distributions, begin at age 75 for someone in their early 60s today, then part of your income just becomes automatic. And when income becomes automatic, then your flexibility gets reduced. At 63, you're designing the structure. You're in control, right? But at age 73, you're more or less operating inside of it and in part reacting to the decisions that you had made earlier on. Let's walk through this in a realistic way. So imagine a married couple retires at 63 with $1.5 million in pre-tax accounts. And they withdraw roughly $80,000 to $90,000 a year to live on, and markets grow modestly over time. And then by age 75, their balance might still be somewhere near where it started. All depending on returns and their withdrawals and all of that. But at age 75, their required minimum distributions, let's say they're around $55,000 to $60,000. And then if you add in another, $50,000 to $60,000 of combined Social Security, or maybe even more, then their taxes are likely reasonable. This is not a disaster at all, but notice what changed. At 63, they could decide whether to generate, $40,000 of taxable income, or they could generate like $120,000 of taxable income. There's just a lot of flexibility in designing their path going forward. But at 75, a meaningful portion of that income is now no longer optional. It just must show up. And so they're now in a situation where the difference here really isn't the tax rate. It's really the control. That's really what we're talking about. This is really where sophistication matters. The larger the pre-tax balance, the more deliberate the sequencing needs to be. And it's not because taxes explode, but it's really because small structural decisions compound over decades. And if most of your wealth is pre-tax, then future bracket management becomes, narrower. Social Security interaction then becomes less flexibility, and Medicare premium thresholds become harder to smooth. Your legacy distributions also become more taxable. Now, none of this is catastrophic, but really retirement planning at higher asset levels, it's rarely about catastrophe. It's really about making small improvements then over time to help put you in a better position there in the future. And to reduce that friction, to help give you more flexibility then throughout retirement. Now, Do understand that this is not an argument that traditional 401ks were a mistake. I mean, they were powerful. They allow you to accumulate money. And this is not an argument that everyone should aggressively convert to a Roth either. I mean, that's an often inefficient thing to do. Just convert everything, over there. The issue is really pre-tax concentration without intentional sequencing. When most of your money is pre-tax, then your lifetime tax path just becomes more fixed than you may realize. Retirement planning, it becomes less about avoiding taxes and more about deciding when they show up. Now, for many retirees, the years between retirement age and age 75 are really the most flexible years that they're ever going to have again. I mean, once required income begins, you're no longer shaping the structure. You're now having to react to it. If most of your retirement savings is in a traditional 401k, this isn't something to panic about, but this is something to model intentionally. If you've done a great job of saving, this is really the stage where thoughtful sequencing can help protect the work that you've already done. How much should you withdraw and from which account? Should you consider conversions? All these different things. Retirement really, it's not just about having enough. By having accumulated and have gotten to that big number, whatever that number is that you're thinking, that's the number that you might need to have. It's also really about maintaining control and flexibility, especially around how and when income appears. I mean, this is one of the most valuable forms of control that you can have. And if you're within 5 years of retirement, and if you have heavily concentrated pre-tax accounts, then this is a structural conversation that's worth having before your income becomes partially automatic. Because keep in mind that once the structure sets itself, then your options are going to narrow. And thoughtful planning is really about preserving your options for as long as possible. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.